Deputy Speaker, this evening this parliament faces a simple but serious choice. Do we keep faith with the residents of Queensland's manufactured home parks, or do we give the minister a free pass on delaying the protections that were promised last year? Do we honour the reforms that this very House passed in 2024, or do we allow the Crisafulli government to hit the snooze button for another year? This disallowance motion is about whether we allow a regulation to delay protections that we all voted for. Another broken promise by this government made to thousands of Queenslanders, now delayed at the stroke of a pen. If you want the short summary of tonight's choice, it's this: residents lose when we delay. Park owners who do the right thing lose when we delay. And the government shows it isn't ready to govern when it delays. And I say to the member for Bonnie, if you're not prepared to govern, get out of the way and let those who are do the job. Let's remember how these reforms were passed in the first place. They weren't conjured up out of thin air. They came from years of consultation, from submissions, from departmental analysis, from residents who told us in plain English what was wrong. They came from park residents who gave their time over a long and significant consultation period. Park residents like those who travelled here today, and I'd like to take a moment to recognise some of those members in the gallery: Sandy, Vera, Betty, Carol, Relma, Eleanor, Roger, Sharon, Sue, Ian and Maggie. Thank you for your generosity in taking the time today to come to this parliament where these laws were passed last year. The Labor opposition remain committed to delivering the protections that were legislated by this parliament, and we are committed to holding the current government to account for the delays to the protections that you helped shape and deserve to see implemented. We have seen the minister scramble to appear to act, but only after being called out in this House when I gave him notice that I would move this motion today to force him to do his job. And I take the interjections. That is exactly what happened. This is the second speech in this parliament that I've delivered today where progress has only happened after I and the Labor opposition called out the government's delays and inaction. It should not take the opposition giving notice that we will act for government ministers to do their job. There are roughly 23,700 manufactured home sites across about 200 residential parks in Queensland. Around 38,000 Queenslanders call these parks home, and a large majority are retirees, many of them aged pensioners, many of them on fixed incomes. These are people who have worked a lifetime, raised families, volunteered in their communities, paid their taxes, and who deserve stability and respect. While site rent increases limits now apply for existing homeowners, without the now delayed reforms, new residents and future agreements remain exposed to less predictable arrangements. Residents told us that sales processes were too slow and too opaque, leaving people paying site rent month after month while they tried to sell a home so they could move to aged care or close to family. They told us that site agreements can be inconsistent, complex and sometimes one-sided, leaving ordinary people feeling like they were signing away their rights when they moved in. They are not abstract ivory tower complaints. They are kitchen table realities for many park residents on fixed incomes. So the 2024 Act did several things in stages. Some of those changes have already commenced, but core protections, practical common sense changes were set to commence automatically on the 7th of June this year. And the government is now delaying those protections for up to 12 months. And I see the housing minister smiling. He thinks that it's funny. These are not boutique, nice to have tweaks.
Member for Gavin, can I just ask you to take your seat for a moment, please? I'm trying to listen to the member of Gavin. There'll be no cross-chamber chatter. Thank you.
Thank
you have the call, member.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I take the Housing Minister's interjection, barely changing the timetable. Well, I would say that a 12-month delay is pretty significantly changing the timetable. These are important reforms to deliver fairness in this sector. First, maintenance and capital replacement plans. Without these plans, residents are flying blind. They don't know which capital works are coming, when they are coming, what standard is expected or who pays. A proper, transparent plan means fewer surprises and fewer disputes. It means confidence that essential assets, roads, drainage, community facilities, utility infrastructure are not left to crumble until a sudden expensive fix is demanded. It also means residents can see forward and understand what the park owner is or is not responsible for. The second element was limiting bases for site rent increases to approved basis. The Parliament voted to clamp down on the free-for-all of so-called market rent reviews that led to confusion and potential unfairness for new agreements. The reform would standardise approved bases and ensure consistency going forward. And while I do appreciate that the Minister has now conveniently identified a date for these bases to come into effect, it is not clear why this delay or the longer delays to maintenance and capital replacement plans are necessary. Consider a resident whose park's communal facilities have been deteriorating for years. Residents keep being told that upgrades are in the pipeline. With a mandatory maintenance and capital replacement plan, the pipeline would be a documented program, not a promise, and residents could see timelines and standards and insist on delivery. These are not outliers, Deputy Speaker. They are the stories you hear when you visit parks and speak with resident communities. Now, let me deal squarely with the claim that I expect to hear from the government that these matters are complex and more consultation is required to get them right. And the irony, given the member for Bonnie said in this chamber when the bill was originally being debated that these reforms were merely tinkering. Well, if he thought that then, he should have the toolkit to finish these reforms now. Complexity is not, though, an excuse for paralysis. It is a call to competence. If the Minister for Housing now truly believes these are too complex, then he should acknowledge they are important reforms and stop pretending the delay carries no cost to residents. Now, I anticipate, no doubt, that the Minister will want to blame someone else for his delays. He'll probably try and blame me, despite the fact that we legislated these protections to come into effect in June. The member for Bonnie took the role of Housing Minister over 6 months ago now. It's his job to support the public service to deliver priorities that every member of this House voted on, including himself. That no doubt the member for Bonnie will try and squib responsibility once again. The fact is, it is his decision to delay these protections, and if he can't do his job, then as I said, he should move out of the way for someone else who can. We passed the Act in June 2024. The uncommenced provisions were due to start automatically on June this year. The government has had months. Instead of delivering, they tabled a postponement regulation on the 12th
Excuse me, Member
of
for
May.
Gavin. Member for Logan, can I please remind you that you are on a warning? You can continue, Member for Gavin.
Virtually at the 11th hour. That is not the behaviour of a government on top of its brief. That is the behaviour of a government trying to shift a deadline it knew was coming. And they knew it was coming because they voted for those laws. When a parliament votes on reform and a government uses a regulation to postpone it, it tests the trust of this House. It asks us to accept that executive convenience should trump legislative will. Now, that may suit the government today, but it will come at the expense of park residents. Disallowing this regulation restores the timetable this parliament set, not the agenda of those opposite. It sends a message that when this House passes protections for residents, those protections are not optional extras to be turned on and off at the LNP's whim. It says to Queenslanders, the parliament meant what it said. It also says something about standards. If a government wants a different policy, bring a bill, face the House, make your case. Don't use a postponement regulation as a backdoor to dump a promise to people you thought wouldn't notice. And I take the interjection from the member for Bonnie who's saying that they're not changing anything. They're delaying the laws. I don't know if the member for Bonnie just doesn't understand his own regulation, which is probably the case, but it delays the reforms that were meant to come into effect in June. Now, the inconvenient truth for the member for Bonnie is that the opposition noticed and park residents noticed. They noticed when this minister said protections could wait, that years of consultation, of working together with residents and industry to fix issues that threaten the security of people's home don't matter. That's why last month I gave notice to move this disallowance motion. Then, no doubt, what happened behind the scenes was the Housing Minister panicked, and only after we raised this issue publicly did he then go to Executive Council and try and push through some of the reforms.
Member for Bondi, you have a point of order?
I take personal offence. I'd signed the regulation before the member moved the disallowance motion, and I ask the member to withdraw.
Member for Gavin, you've been asked to withdraw.
I withdraw, Mr Deputy Speaker. I take what the member has said, though, and I ask why on earth the government, though, has moved a regulation to delay reforms if, in fact, they were planning on delaying reforms. But the thing is that the matter that went to Executive Council only dealt with some of those matters. There are still other measures in that regulation, in those laws that have not been adequately addressed by the government in the timeframe that this House, and I take the interjection, it's still a delay, it's just a shortened delay on what those opposite tried to move originally. Now, it is a complete shambles over there, Deputy Speaker. What I found particularly interesting, though, were the explanatory notes for the subordinate legislation that the member for Bonnie just mentioned. And I quote what they say right at the end. It says, industry stakeholders mostly preferred a 6-month transition period between proclamation and commencement, whereas consumer stakeholders preferred a faster commencement. So it's clear whose side the Crisafulli government is on when their own document essentially says that they sided with what industry wanted and not what residents wanted. And I take the interjection. In effect, industry have gotten what they did want, because a 6-month delay from when these protections were meant to come into effect is what is eventuating under the changes that the member for Bonnie has put forward. The LNP have chosen to back industry rather than park residents, and that's what their own document shows. Now, while we now, and I take the interjection from the member for Springwood, profit over people, once again, no doubt those opposite will also change developer donations to assist their mates there as well. Now, while we now have a timeline for some of these changes to commence by the end of the year, which is, as the member for Morayfield said, still delayed, critical other elements are still deferred until next year. Even some of the changes the government has been forced to act on, like the sales process, will still remain inconsistent and complicated while the minister kicks the can down the road on standardised sales agreement forms, which was the intent of those reforms to begin with. To reputable park owners, and there are a number out there, I say what many of you already know. Certainty works for you too. Clear rules are good for business. Predictable rent basis reduce disputes and legal costs. Transparent maintenance plans build trust with residents and protect asset values. Streamlined sales keep communities moving and reputations strong. Good operators have nothing to fear from a fair field and no favour. To residents, I say this: you did everything right. You engaged, you made submissions, you told your stories. Parliament listened and acted. And I know that there are many residents out there that want to see even more reforms in this space, but at a minimum, they want to see the laws that we actually voted on in this House passed and implemented. You are entitled to expect the protections to start on time. This motion is about keeping our side of the bargain, making sure the laws we pass actually reach those residents' front door. This debate is also a signal about housing more broadly. In a tight market, rules matter. Predictable costs matter. Speed and clarity in transactions matter. Commencing these provisions now is a modest but meaningful step towards a fairer, more functional part of the housing system for Queenslanders. Now, those opposite will say, what's another 6 months, 1 more year? For a cabinet submission, maybe not much. For a family on a fixed income, it can be an eternity. It is another summer of heat with no shade at the community centre still waiting on maintenance. It's another missed chance to sell while the market is there. Leadership is not about claiming credit, it is about doing the work. The test of government is not whether you can draft a postponement regulation and hope no one notices. It's whether you can implement your commitments, the law Parliament already passed, in full and on time. The minister has been forced to reveal that these things can be delivered, and I take the interjection from the member for Bonnie again. I was the housing minister and I passed these laws. You're the housing minister and you've delayed them. That's what the record will show.
Excuse me, members. Member for Gavin, member for Bonnie. Through the chair, thank you. No cross-chamber conversation. Thank you. You have the call, member for Gavin.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The government has had the time, the excuses have run out. The cost of delay is borne by those most vulnerable, and the Housing Minister cannot square his past dismissal of these reforms as tinkering around the edges with his present plea that these are too complex now to
Madam
deliver.
Acting Speaker,
They're your own words.
Member for Bonnie, you have a point of order.
I take personal offence. It was a cognate debate. I was talking about the botched rental reforms that were also fixed in that bill. I ask the member to withdraw. I take personal offence.
Member for Gavin, I did miss what you said, but the member has taken offence. Can I please ask you to withdraw?
Happy to withdraw, Deputy
Thank
Speaker.
you, Member for Gavin.
I ask members to stand with resonance, not with excuses. Vote to disallow the manufactured home residential parks amendment postponement regulation. Honour the law we passed. Keep faith with Queenslanders who trusted us to deliver it.